Remarks.
Objection.
On March 1st of this year, drug manufacturer Eli Lilly announced its plan to institute a $35 cap on out-of-pocket insulin costs. 2 weeks later, Novo Nordisk announced plans to cut its insulin prices by up to 75%. And just 2 days after that, Sanofi announced their decision to cut the U.S. price of its most prescribed insulin by 78% and cap costs at $35 for those with private insurance. Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi make up roughly 90% of the insulin market in the United States, a market that for decades has been characterized by skyrocketing costs and unbelievable price gouging. Some might say that these price capping announcements are examples of corporate responsibility. Let me correct the record. I say it's about damn time. I say this action is a hollow, decades too late example of big pharmaceutical companies attempting to shirk regulation as they face the most realistic possibility ever of being held accountable for price gouging Americans. I say it's not enough, because for a century, pharmaceutical companies have been exploiting and profiting off Americans who depend on insulin and other life-saving medications to survive. In 1923, the inventors of insulin sold the patent for just $1. They felt it was unethical to profit from a discovery that would save so many lives. How ironic. Since then, insulin costs have skyrocketed, jumping 500% in just the past decade or so, with a vial costing as much as thousands of dollars per month. Americans represent 15% of the global insulin market, yet we generate almost 50% of the pharmaceutical industry's insulin revenue. That's not an accident. Big Pharma has for decades taken advantage of the non-existent regulation on drug pricing in the United States to make billions in profit off insulin. It is corporate greed, pure and simple, fueled by hundreds of millions in dark money lobbying to intimidate Congress from reining in the industry. In 2022 alone, pharma and health product companies spent a record $372 million lobbying against pricing regulations and Medicare negotiations. Big Pharma is well-organized, well-funded, and well-connected. That's why last year's Inflation Reduction Act was so historic. It was the first successful attempt in decades to curtail this price gouging. The work to lower drug prices is why I ran for office in the first place. It's been one of my very top priorities since day one in Congress, so much so that I have been called a dog with a bone when it comes to the fight to get drug prices down. I co-sponsored and voted to pass the Lower Drug Prices Now Act. I voted to pass the Affordable Insulin Now Act to cap the cost of insulin at $35 per month for everyone. I introduced the bipartisan Fair Drug Prices for Kids Act to lower costs for families by allowing states to purchase medication at the lowest price offered by drug manufacturers. I called on House and Senate leadership time and again to take swift legislative action to lower drug costs. I stood with my constituents affected by high insulin prices to call attention to the crisis they face. I called for Build Back Better to include a measure enabling Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And I helped pass into law the Inflation Reduction Act that finally realizes so many of these priorities. The Inflation Reduction Act capped the price of insulin at $35 per month for Medicare beneficiaries. Now, Big Pharma sees the writing on the wall. Their decision to lower insulin costs for everyone does not come out of so-called corporate responsibility. This decision comes because corporations are afraid that Congress, now having momentum, will continue to take action to rein in their corporate greed. Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, Sanofi could have at any point in the last century capped the price of insulin and saved many lives. They're only doing it now as part of a transparent PR campaign to stave off further congressional action regulating drug prices. They can lower costs at will, but they can also raise costs at will. And that means we must act, because your ability to afford life-saving medications should not be dependent on the whims of Big Pharma's pricing decisions. For the countless people across my district and across the country who depend on life-saving insulin, I'm telling you that I will never back down.